First off, how great is Substack? I love it. I love
It's
that we
different.
can do these,
Yeah.
right? It's so different. And so I'm a lover of all things relational, human connection, human performance. And I've been living with the question, how do we step into our highest version of ourselves or our highest possible potential? That used to be reserved more for sports when I was young, and then business in my early 20s and probably into my early 30s. And then I really realized that the amount of information for transformation available in any form of relationship is just too potent to ignore. And that was through my own relational breakdowns that I was like, wait, as I started to really think about the question, who am I and why am I here and what is my purpose? I started to see that I was not guided to ask those questions when I was young.
Mhm.
And so Branden, through our journeys, we came into contact, and best friends, and we actually both in the same men's group. And so that's a little bit about me. B, share a bit about you.
Yeah. What's up, everyone? Such an honor to be here. It's happening all the way from Thailand. So I'm on the other side of the world, different time zones. And similar to Mark, my entire journey has been motivated and moved through this idea that we are so much more than the labels that are placed upon us. We are so much more than the systems that tell us what we're supposed to be. And it's been for me a 22 plus year journey of peeling back the layers and seeing what is underneath the hood. And it started with the somatic body. I was a personal trainer, performance coach for 20 plus years. And during that time, it opened up the doors to the mental body where I dove deep into the world of psychology and neuroscience. And then eventually my soul started speaking the words of initiation. And that led me to a 8 year plus 20 country plus journey into the healing arts, yoga, plant medicine, and the initiatory practices that so many cultures have held for so many centuries. And so my passion, my play, my purpose all revolves around this idea that we are so powerful and each one of us has a unique gift to bring to this world. And all we got to do is tap into the love that we are. And on the other side of that, there is so much beauty to play with. And so my purpose, my dharma is to help others step into their power. And a lot of that comes from doing the work myself.
Yeah, Brandon and I were motivated to have a conversation about men because I get asked all the time. I'm sure you do too. Uh, where are all the good men? And
All the
then
time.
the other thing I get asked by good men is, where are all the good women? So,
Right.
I'm like, people are just missing each other. I know tons of good men and tons of good women. The thing too is that I think we're afraid of what will happen when someone who can meet us will meet us. And so it's almost
Yes.
like, oh, I don't see that over there, even though it's right over there. Now, it would be remiss to say that there isn't a challenge going on for men. If you look at all the data, as that saying goes, failure to launch, there's a lot of issues going on for men. The suicide rate is higher than for
Mhm.
girls. And going to college, although I'm sure the conversation about the value of college these days, depending on which area you want to go in your life, is probably up for discussion too. But there's just so many ways in which we've rightfully so talked about the productivity and improving the outcomes of women. That's been really important, especially as, we move through I guess you might call the restoration after a more patriarchal structure and the use of power and things like not being able to vote, etc. Right? There's so much stuff. But what I've really noticed is the conversation about men is, if it is being had, is generally about things like the manosphere. It's like the Netflix documentary, which it's an interesting documentary. Did you watch it, B?
I did. It was disturbing on many levels.
Yeah, the men they portrayed were rightfully so, people were disturbed by them. What I found that Louis Theroux didn't do well, which is no offense to him, is that it was TV, is that there wasn't a conversation about what creates these men. Yeah, they talked about how, like, they often don't have a father, which is really important, of course, which we'll talk about. The Maria, the documentary is called The Manosphere, and I think it's on Netflix. And can you guys not hear me well? I just wanna make sure. But it's called The Manosphere. And essentially what they look at is these men who are online male influencers, and that they're quite toxic, you know? They're talking about women a certain way, they're talking about
Mhm,
business. And the conversation wasn't like, what creates this? Like, why are young men, because the young men really looked up to these guys. And some of the
mhm,
values that these guys held, like discipline and clean your life up and take responsibility for your life, those are important messages. The problem is that when a young man or a young boy is not given the option of integrated, powerful men, and I don't mean powerful exploitive, I mean
mhm,
powerful embodied, then
mhm,
that's what they turn towards when the conversation that they hear is that men suck, men are toxic, men are evil, men are rapists, men are murderers,
mhm.
and they don't also hear about good men. They don't also hear that that's uh, unintegrated trauma, or they get context to it. There's not a way out. And of course, if you have one group of people saying men suck and they need to apologize their whole lives, and then you have another group that says don't apologize for anything, get cars, money, and women. I
Mhm.
mean, which one are you going to go towards? It's a pretty simple math. You know what I mean? So, what do you think
That's
about
it.
it?
I mean, one, being a byproduct of a society and world that has lost its rights and its pathways of initiation. As a
Yeah,
man who grew up without a father, who grew up in a single mother household where she took on the responsibility of both being my mother and father, growing up in a system that taught me that being a man meant getting money, getting women, and producing and performing and being seen. I firsthand have experienced how destructive it can be. And what's wild is a lot of the work that we do on this path of healing, right? Especially as men, is actually going backwards and rebuilding, restructuring all the damage that was done from a society and system that had really no care about our well being, that wanted us to
right.
just produce and to, um, you know, in a way, like take our life force in pathways that were net negative rather than net positive. It really comes down to like lack of initiatory practices. And most young boys have never been initiated, welcomed into their manhood by brothers and uncles and grandpas and grandmas and aunties and a village. And where initiation goes wrong is when it is done for the sake of the capital I. When initiation is for just me only and not a community at large, that's when you get unchecked initiation. That's when you get money at all costs, conquest of women at all costs, being seen at all costs, rather than there being some type of guardrail against an unchecked ego and unchecked individuality. And so this is what I see happening in a lot of these spaces. A lot of these young men have just never been shown that there is something bigger than them holding them. What we're seeing in this toxic culture of masculinity is the byproduct of men who have been told to produce at all costs, even if it means destroying everything in their path as part of the process. And this is really the invitation of our times, is for men to come back to initiatory practices, come back to the community, come back to being held accountable, because there's nothing more powerful than an embodied man, and there's nothing more destructive than a disembodied man. And I think we see it
Yeah.
playing out full force in our culture right now.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that the unintegrated power of a man, the shadow side, which culture is calling toxic masculinity. What happens is when you shame men and you point only to that, they become, as you were using that word, disembodied from even access to power because they're afraid that if they are powerful, they'll be dangerous. As opposed to, and so that energy that is destructive is also protective if used and integrated from responsibility,
Mhm,
if integrated through community. And
mhm,
that lack of initiation, which then produces unintegrated men. And you could argue, right? You and I have talked about this personally. I think it's an interesting subject to have with everybody here. Is that society kind of goes, well, listen, things are fucked up because men fucked things up, and then you hear men go, well, things are fucked up because women are fucked up, and then my mom fucked me up. So it's like, it, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And I think what's fascinating is we want to look for where to point the finger, and we'll be able to find a place. But this all comes down to, uh, where you think it began, because we're looking to say, well, then you take care of it. And I think the challenge that has been for men is, I think this is true. What I believe, other people might not believe this, which is that it doesn't actually matter where it comes from. This is, I think, a lot like pathologizing our suffering. It doesn't matter, or our toxic patterns, whatever it is. You don't need to know where your pattern comes from to know you need to change it. And I think we live in a culture that's obsessed with pathologizing. And I think the other part is, instead of actually changing, instead of actually doing something about it. And I think the work of men in this time is, sure, there's probably a lot of things developmentally and culturally and in your family that created the patterns that you have. And we can have compassion for that. And there needs to be compassion for that, for
mhm,
growing up with an unattuned, as in you're talking about, my mom was overwhelmed. My mom was, and my dad and mom were together and have a healthy relationship. And so, because we didn't grow up in village, we didn't grow up with, other aunties and uncles all around us. Right. So,
mhm,
my whole point being that someone has to say, okay, well, we're going to take responsibility for this. And I, as a man, am no longer going to contribute to unattuned partners. I'm no longer going to contribute to not being attuned to children. And so someone has to say the pattern stops here. And I think it's the work of men to say, we're
yeah,
stopping it. Of course, women are also saying, "We're stopping it. This isn't," but, it's that we need to stop saying, "Life's not fair to us," which can be true,
mhm,
but what the fuck are you gonna do with it, right? And that's where initiated elders or other men say, "It's time," because as you were saying, this absence of initiation is about having the young boy, usually teenager, start to realize that they are responsible not just for themselves, and now they are responsible for the village. They're responsible for the community. They're responsible for the family. And now they're given something and also guided to actually be able to hold that. That's powerful. If you know that you're responsible for your family, not in a way that's too early for
mhm,
your development, or your father never gave it to you, or your father made you responsible instead of taking responsibility himself. That's a whole different conversation. But yeah, I think there's just this, like, we spend so much time saying chicken or egg. It's like, yo, as men, we have to heal the grief we have about not being attuned to, about culture having conversations about us in a way without which lacks compassion and context. And we also have to go, let's fucking go.
that's it. It's radical responsibility, and in taking radical responsibility, a radical freedom comes online. The very fact that this conversation is even in our awareness, the very fact that so many men and women are asking the question, "How do I be a better man? How do I be a better woman?" The answers to those questions in particular bring on a whole nother level of radical responsibility. But there's so much power in finally taking ownership of the wounds, of the setbacks, of our ancestral traumas to say, from here forward, my goal, my intention is to create the most nutrient rich soil for my own self to blossom, but also the most nutrient rich soil for the community at large to blossom. And this is what initiation at its core was designed to do. You know, they say that the definite difference between initiation and trauma, it's a very thin line. One,
Mhm.
so they both push a person to a threshold. One, there's no container to hold that person when they're pushed to the threshold, and there's no meaning that is given through that. So instead of it becoming an initiation, their fractured nervous system overload and trauma gets lodged in the somatics, and that's a whole different pathway. Initiation at the same time, you're pushed towards a threshold, but there's meaning rooted into it. There's community rooted into it. And on the other side of that, you are expanded as an individual to hold more, to be able to stand as a pillar to the community, to unlock a deeper level of sovereignty within oneself. When initiations are not part of a culture, Francis Weller would say, then we have this concept called suspended adolescence. And Mark, I think this is
Yeah.
what you're really talking about is that you have quote unquote grown women and grown men, but who's running the machinery? Is it a fully formed, mature adult who understands that it is bigger than them? Or is it still the little kid who is scared, untooled? When you have a little kid running, especially with men, grown men machinery, that's when it is dangerous. And this is the opportunity and invitation of our times is for us men in particular to do the deep work, to excavate what we need to excavate, to truly allow ourselves to be seen, not in a way that, is weak, but in a way that allows for us to become more integrated and more embodied in our own expression. And I just pulled up this quote that I love from the Eastern Body, Western Mind that really talks about the the level of perception it takes to do this work. And the quote goes, if the outer world is to be transformed, the process must begin within. If the inner world is to be transformed, it must be understood in light of the outer forces that shaped it. This is so important
Yeah.
to understand that, yes, it is our responsibility to fix some fucked up things that have happened in the world to us, to our community systems, to the feminine, to the masculine as well. And in that light, that's when we can start to make the shifts. And I truly believe there's a reason why this collective consciousness right now is slowly bringing on the conversation of there is a better way. What an opportunity. And that excites me.
Yeah, me too, and I think when I was younger, what I felt that there was an absence of was compassion for the context that created my own people pleasing or lack of access to boundaries, etcetera, because I
Mhm.
was afraid to be a toxic man, even though I was actually just afraid to stand for myself or disappoint women.
Right.
A lot of that obviously rooted in childhood, but also rooted in the cultural narratives. And I think when a group of men get together, there's nothing more powerful than that. Like healing has to happen in relationship, of course, and healing has to happen, if we're in relationships with women, that of course has to happen too. But where there hasn't been large groups of men holding one another, where there hasn't been that like when we have access to elders who are wise, who are integrated, who are able to lead and who are able to ask questions about the difficult moments in our life. Because I think about some of the most unintegrated or unresolved, what you might call trauma versus an initiation, is when I went through a giant betrayal, where a partner betrayed me. And then I didn't have a community to make that mean something different than what I made it mean on my own,
Mhm.
you know? And it doesn't
Mhm.
mean I didn't have great guys around me. We just weren't thinking about things in the context of initiation or like I was on a sports team and I had great buddies, but no one was asking, "What are you making this mean? Are you okay? How do we hold you in this transition?" And it's not because there was an absence of love or kindness, there was just an absence of direction. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, there's a different texture when
Yeah,
the initiatory layer on our journeys. And there's a different texture when you're around people or you surround yourself with people who have the understanding that it's um, way deeper than skin deep. There's a quote I love. It goes, "A true friend is somebody who will travel into the depths of your dark night of the soul with a torch to remind you of who
I
you
like
are."
that. Yeah,
And initiation done right has to be community. There is a community aspect done to it. Again, initiation done for just the individual. Like, how do I initiate myself for the sake of me just being the most grandiose version of myself alone? That's an inflated initiation that doesn't really touch on the the loss of community and loss of the family system, and that will always remain hollow. But when an initiation is done in for the sake of I am becoming the best I can be so I can be the best for the community, what that does, it also opens up the doors for the community to be the best they can for the individual. And that once upon a time was how it worked.
right,
Why do we want to initiate this individual? Because he's going to be a more powerful pillar in our community, and the community is going to benefit from this individual becoming initiated. And so the community would then also wrap their arms around that individual so that they could bring all of their gifts online. And this is why it's so important. We hear this all the time, like, who do we surround ourselves with? People who know me know I'm maniacal in a sense when it comes to the standard of people that are around me. And I know the same for you, Mark. Like, you have a standard, and I feel that when it's one thing to walk towards the initiatory path. Every coaching program that's out there right now, every rite of passage retreat out there right now is touching on this, like, soul's desire to be initiated. But
yeah,
it's not just the the how, it's the who. Who is initiating a person. And and this is the reason why we once upon a time revered the elders, because the elder was somebody who walked the path before a person so that they could give them the best practices so that they didn't get eaten by the lion or
right.
eat too many mushrooms or completely, like, get lost in the wilderness. This is the power of what I feel comes online when we begin to allow ourselves to step into community, a community of integrity, a community of transparency, a community of elders, a community of understanding. I truly believe that the individual then is given the the, the foundation and the container to grow.
Yeah, so beautifully said. Because if we are growing in those types of fertile soils, what is possible for our life is so different. And also when we're treated and the community itself I is holding things, is revering things with such, love and this it's not even a high standard, but revering in this with just such deep coherence and integrity, right? And to be surrounded by men who are not, looking at porn, men who are, treating their partners with deep reverence, who are leading conversations, who are not sexualizing all the women around them, who are not exploiting power, right? Like,
Mhm.
this is think about how many leaders we hear about who I mean, the Epstein files were a good revelation of so many of those people that someone like Chopra, who totally caught people, I would imagine. I didn't know him closely, maybe to people close to him, it didn't catch anyone off guard. But I think that continuously what is disappointing for women and men is seeing who culture props up, and then that this man still has not done the deep work and is still exploiting power on such a high level, and doing it from the lens of spiritualism, you know, and just how important it is that if we do have power, that we must wield it in a way that is responsible. And,
Mhm.
you know, I think what it is, there's so many traps for men these days, right? Like, and there's
So
traps for everybody, but, you think like we everything that does not get taken care of when we're young, and when we don't get the right guidance and the right initiation from community and culture, because a community can insulate a a young person from having a parent or parents who are not responsible, parents who are not attuned. A community can insulate that, um, and give some guidance. But what happens is that in the context of what most people have been through, we live in a culture where you generally need 2 salaries to pay for things. So we have parents who are not around. We have a lot of men and women who are not present with their children. And so we at some point have to begin or continue to break this cycle. And I know Evan sharing that the Joshua Project and Journeyman have rites of passages and experiences for young men. We have friends who work in the men's work world too who do that. We are in that space. And so there's lots of people who are desiring to do this support. And I'm curious, when you think about, you've worked with some of the highest performers in the world from an athletic perspective, right? From a fitness perspective. What do you notice with these men who are high achievers over here? And what is their relationship to, let's say, power, their masculine? What do you notice as the things that they long for? Because I think that longing that we have is, you said it earlier, is always kind of like collectively we have a longing right now for rites of passage. I think
mhm.
for a lot of men who have achieved in one area and have power, and have impact, there's often a longing that coexists. What do you think about it?
I've had the blessing, as you mentioned, to witness and be in the lab with thousands of people over the last 20 years. But the person that I have the most direct research on is my own self. And what got me to becoming one of the, most potent human performance coaches in the game was not because I was whole. It was because I didn't feel like I was enough. It was because I felt like I had to become the best of the best of the best of the best of the best at my thing. And it wasn't until I started really diving deep into the yoga space that I realized that a lot of my achievement motivation was rooted from a place of insecurity, of a place of not feeling like I'm enough, a place of not feeling chosen, a place of not feeling like anybody would choose me if I was mediocre. And the last few years, it's been a really beautiful homecoming to come back to myself and begin to excavate what it was that pushed me towards that hyper achievement mentality for 20 plus years. And this is when I really started speaking a lot on my social media about this concept called the level down. It was like, okay, so the tree is really beautiful and there's these fruits blossoming from the tree, but what is the constitution of the soil that it sits in? And so one of the beautiful things about bringing like the lens and wisdom of mother nature back into this journey that we're all on is when I speak to somebody and I say I see that there is a lot of beautiful blossomings happening in your life. Yes, you're successful. Yes, you've achieved a lot, but how's your soil? let's
Right.
let's speak about the soil. Let's talk about that. 99% of the time, a lot of times, those that have achieved a lot, there's something in the soil that has gotten either completely discarded or is just toxically sitting there fueling their success. And
Yeah.
what I've witnessed is when they finally get to the root of it, I like to call this like root work. Why is it that I want to be successful? Why is it that I need hundreds of millions of dollars? Why is it that I need another woman every other month? Why is it I can't stand solidly in my marriage or in a relationship? When one begins to get to the root of it, it really always comes back to something that was lost in those formative years of childhood, moving into teenager, moving into young adulthood, something that was lost that inevitably has been masked by going for what our society considers is to be successful.
Yeah.
I was speaking to a whole bunch of UFC fighters like 3 years ago. They brought me in. They said, what is the one thing you would tell these guys if they want to take their performance to the next level? This is like, the killers of the killers. And I said, self love. And mouths dropped. These dudes were like, is this dude
Yeah.
really coming on here and talking
Yeah,
to us
like,
about
you
self
mean
love?
punch someone in the mouth.
Yeah,
That's what you
yeah.
mean.
But behind the scenes, people were hitting me up like in the DMs, like, yo, bro, I really needed to hear that. And the truth
Yeah.
is, like, even the strongest men amongst us want to feel, even the people who have the hardest exterior, when you really peel back the layers, everybody wants love. And there's a term that I often speak about that is super powerful and also really is symbolic to the current state of times. And it's called normative male alexithymia. You all can look that up. Normative male alexithymia is this diagnosis in the DSM of men being disconnected with their emotional bodies.
Mm.
And I feel that when a man is disconnected from his feeling body, he is disconnected from his power. The invitation of all of this work that we do is to feel again, to
Yeah.
connect back to the heart body. And when a man is connected truly to his heart, when he's connected truly to his emotions, when he's connected truly to his feelings, he doesn't become weaker. He becomes more powerful. He becomes more safe. He becomes more embodied. And the last thing I'll say to that is what's interesting is when we do this soil work, and this is the grief that comes online, all of a sudden, what once was the pursuit or the goal or the highest level of achievement, when the soil changes, so too does the pursuit. And so
Yeah.
one has to be willing to go through the whole identity unraveling and being reconfigured from a healthy way. And that is one of the things that I feel holds so many people back from taking those first steps into like the deep soil work and the excavation.
Yeah, that's so well said because when I went on the first part of my journey of saying, like, "How did I get here? Why am I the way I am?" I it inevitably had me awaken and ask bigger questions within the work I was doing at the time. And
Mhm,
seeing that I was doing a job I was taught to have, that I came out of my teens and 20s with the message that I needed to make enough money to be perceived as a good provider and to be able to make, I mean, with inflation, I mean, back then it was 100K a year, it's probably 400 now, you know? But, uh, I really placed my value on getting a good career and then, having some level of charisma and attraction so that I could get a partner and then create a family, and then my value was really based on that, not on the integration of my heart, and not on, my ability to lead or how coherent was I in these pursuits, and you realize when you wake up and start asking these questions that you've been doing it from an incoherent place. Because one of the big questions I asked when I was 27 was, how why did I mean, the first question was like, why did I get engaged when I didn't want to? Why did I not want someone who was a really incredible person? That didn't make sense to me. It was everything on the list. But those questions that start with the why do I have an addiction? Why can I not put my phone down? Why those questions are always the doorway. And
mhm,
as you said, once you start asking the question, it inevitably brings you to every area of your life, and you get down into the soil and you start tending to it, and then you realize, wait, I don't want to be, not around people that I love. I don't want to be around people who don't share similar values or similar pursuits.
Mhm.
And, a lot of the conversation is, which I think we can get lost in. There are a lot of things that are appealing to both men and women, but in the context of men, that will rob us of our possibility. Things like alcohol, things like drugs, things like porn. And
Mhm.
this is true for everybody, but let's just speak in the context of men. It's like pornography is deadly, what it
Mhm.
will do to the mind. And so we have to remember the biological part of us that gets robbed. And, in different cultures, they would call that the predator or they would call that the devil. And I was reading the book Against the Machine. I know you were reading it too. And he said, what we used to call the devil, we now call progress.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that really sat with me, this idea that things like technology, which are perceived as progress, actually further disembody us. And so we could all go, well, there's a war on humanity, there's a war on men, there's a war on whatever it is. But the more we try to fight against, we're distracted. We're not actually in the work of like, oh, wait, in my community, there's these other men who want to do this. Oh, wait, there's some other men in the world. Go towards the production part of it.
Mhm.
Because again, the predator or whatever you might call it is distracting you from actually stepping into full coherence. Because I think for men, what's really simple, but this is true for everybody, but especially for men, if your life is not aligned with your values, you will need some sort of something to numb the awareness of your own self abandonment. Right? Like,
Mhm.
I know that was true for me. The moment I started to get sober from alcohol, then I had to feel things that live below the alcohol. Then I had to get sober, the sobriety had to I was playing whack-a-mole with the things that I needed to, heal. And and I don't think that journey's ever done, and I'm not gonna say it is because I know the universe will give me a slap and give me something else. So,
Always.
yeah, exactly. So, like, humble
Always.
student. Um, but one thing I've noticed about really high performing men or high achieving men is, yes, there's often a feeling like they did the thing they were taught and now they got the thing and they might even be getting women, but there's an absence of depth to
Mhm.
all of it. Like almost like, holy crap, I was lied to. Like I thought that if I got all this, I would reach the highest level pinnacle of humanity. And what you see in all of them is this desire for deep relationship. The ones who
Mhm.
come knocking, some of them will still dance in the things, the superficial. And I've been there, so no judgment. We all have to get to the place we need to get to. But what I notice a lot is that absence of like real responsibility. Like that absence of like, I'm gonna be exceptional in every area of my life. And I think what you said, which is so powerful, is like when we start to take responsibility for that and we say, okay, well, I might be a seven-figure earner, I might be a high performing athlete. What do my relationships look like? Like who am I really?
Mhm.
And if I don't love who I am, and if the source of my achievements is from my wounds, then when we go to transition, we all have to transition from being motivated from wounds. We all have to move to being motivated from creating light, creating integration. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Motivated to create from love,
Right.
you know, to create from our own hearts in the most aligned way imaginable. And there's a lot of grief that comes online with the journey of the level up, right? This is the part that nobody talks about is the grief. It's not like you just like all of a sudden level up and then what was and what is. There's so many liminal spaces and dark valleys that one has to walk through. And a lot of times the identity that got us to where we are served its purpose. And so it's not about demonizing what was, but it's especially when the soul begins to speak, you know, Emerson, one of my favorite quotes goes, "There's nothing capricious in nature. The implanting of a desire means that its gratification is in the constitution of the creature that feels it. When the soul begins to nudge, when it begins to knock, when the heart begins to say, there's another way, a new way, that leap in itself is going to completely annihilate and
Yeah.
bring online a whole set of circumstances that is going to be hard, going to be challenging. There's going to be losses. There's going to be hard conversations. There's going to be setbacks. There's going to be step ups. But at the end of the day, like, is it worth it? Is love worth it? Is healing worth it? Is whole relationships worth it? Is being clear worth it? Is losing the fog of
Amen.
alcoholism and pornography addiction and like spinning and spiraling? Is that worth it? 100 fucking percent yes.
Always.
And sometimes it takes 10 years of being in that work to just get to like, all right, I kind of got the hang of it. Me personally, took me 22 years to get to healthy. Took me 20 years of being in the work to finally arrive in my first healthy relationship. And let me tell you something. Oh, did I think that it was going to be just perfect and I was just going to go in there and it wasn't going to be work? Every day I'm working in my relationship, but with the tools that I've acquired along the way. So for those on the path, whether they're women or men, there's a moment in time, and this is what Mark's really alluding to, where you finally say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And there's a hard line in the sand, and I'm stepping over it fully, not 1 foot in and 1 foot out, but fully. And once that happens, that's when the work really begins.
Yeah.
We've spoken so much about how the brain, what a incredible instrument, but also what an incredible saboteur of our potential at times. We derive dopamine from the familiar. We derive dopamine from old identities. We derive dopamine from things that are toxic, even if it's holding us back. And actually, what I've experienced, that initial leap into healthy is going to feel a lot worse than just engaging in the toxic habits. There's like a
Amen.
limited period
Right?
in between it all for something new to come online. And this is why, going back to what Mark said, like, we can't do it alone. We need a team of people. We need to wrap ourselves in community. We need to have people that are down to go on the journey with us, to hold us accountable. And this is the beauty is once a person steps forward, like for example, I've worked with a lot of really, really high level athletes that weren't all in on all in. They were like kind of, they got by on their talent. They're 90% there. And so they just arrived at a very high level of performance. But every once in a while, you get somebody who doesn't have all the talent in the world, but they're 100% there. They're
Yeah.
down to ride and give their everything. When a person comes into a space with that type of energy, when a person steps over that line of their potential with that type of energy, you best believe there's going to be people that recognize that in you. And even if you don't have all the tools to continue to like step into the healing process, the grieving process, the transformation process, people are going to hold you because they see that you're actually all in on all in. And on the flip side, and I know Mark can attest to this too, there's nothing more disrespectful than the beautiful people in your life that will hold you or your own potential than those who are 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Because what that does, it just becomes a never ending loop. And more people than you can imagine will never ever leave that loop just to
Yeah.
be
It's true.
100. We see it all the time. So this work requires courage at the highest level. But what I've seen and what I'm learning as I continue to dive deeper into it is like on the other side of the courage, on the other side of the leap, there's so much grace, there's so much love. It gets so good. And so the real question is, how good can it get? And the
Oh,
truth is
so
we do not know how good it can get.
yeah.
So why not? step forward.
Yeah, there is you whenever you let go of any vice or any mediocrity or whatever, what is on the other side, as you said, the first part feels a lot worse than the than the drink or the cocaine or whatever
Yeah.
it is, porn. But what is beyond it is what it's been preventing us from feeling the whole time. And what you were saying about root work, just being really um, when you get into the root, the soil, there's so much more vastness to it. I think there's like a whole aspect of emotion and feeling that I just wasn't aware of, and it's just normalized in culture to numb that. That's what is monetized. So like when you start to say, I'm going to feel everything, of course you're going to feel the suffering of the world. And you're also going to notice that the people who are not feeling things, which used to be you, and again, you keep finding ways that you need to reveal how you numb from your emotionality. I think the question from Evan that really lends to just closing this out too is, how do each of you think about the role of older men and mentors in that process? And have either of you been involved in long-term men's circles or intergenerational men's work? So Brandon and I both belong to the same men's group, and we've been in that group for 6 years. Yeah, six
That's
years
like
now, which
five
is
years
great.
for me.
Yeah, and it's just like an incredible group of men that we all hold each other with a high standard. There's a high level of integrity, and the group itself holds each other to that. And we've had members had to leave because, or one member specifically have to leave because couldn't hold that. And the role of older men, I have older male mentors. I have a father who's a mentor. I'm blessed, and it's so incredibly important. We've talked about this throughout that. Uh, Elders are so essential for the continuity of both responsibility and wisdom. And I think in a culture, and that's a whole other subject, but with things like Botox and filler and all these things, there is a fear of aging. And when you reject aging, you reject the wisdom that comes with aging. And
That's it.
so we are about embracing, like, hey, I'm not taking anything for these cul-de-sacs that are coming in because I'm going to just let what happens happens. And no shade if people want to get those hair plugs, they do look good. Um, but I'm just like, you know what? I have to accept aging because what comes with aging is experience and ideally integration and wisdom. And really being able to shape, like Brandon and I have talked about this, and I'm curious your answer for this to be. But Brandon and I have talked about this, and one of the things we're so excited about is actually creating a journey for men to walk through initiation and to walk through this high level of responsibility for one another, but then not just a 7-month journey that will be each month about high performance, about looking at vices, about it's about accelerating every area of your life, but also um, we'll finish with a retreat that is specifically designed to do that. Also in 7 days, where you're deeply immersed in nature, all the things we're talking about. So yeah, B, what about you? The role of older men and mentors in the process?
I think that it is so vitally important. And I think that it is one of the reasons why so many boys have never truly stepped into manhood. I think that women are very important to initiate boys in some ways. And I think that men are just as important to initiate men in other ways. And the two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And one of the things that has always stayed with me from my travels is my time in Kenya with the Maasai warriors. For those that don't know, the Maasai warriors are some of the last lion hunters, one of the last really intact tribes in Kenya. And I went out there and I was blessed to spend a day with a group of men, brothers, and hear their stories and how they were initiated. And some of the some of the stuff is absolutely wild, like being circumcised in front of the entire community to show your strength. But one of the most celebrated ways of their initiation was going out to the Maasai and having to, once upon a time, kill a lion. Now, I believe they just cut the mane. But what was beautiful in my conversation with one of the chief's son, his name was Sebi, was him talking about his role in the tribe, how
Mm,
important it was that he went through this process with his brothers, how he was standing on the shoulders of his ancestors, how his father and grandpa and great grandpa knew the way. And I said, "How long have you been on these lands, Sebi?" And he said, "Thousands of years." There was a confidence in his eyes
wow.
that I've never seen in the West, something unbroken, something unshakable. It was there that I really saw firsthand what is possible when you do have uncles and grandpas and elders that have walked the way. In the Quechua tradition of Peru, and for those who know me, know I spend a lot of time down there, there's no word in Quechua for leader. There's just guide. Guide, and guide to them means somebody who's already walked the path and can help others walk the path in a more easy way. And this is the power and beauty of eldership if one is fortunate enough to have lived long enough, to experience long enough, to have made it through the trials and tribulations of life, is they eventually land in eldership. Isn't it
Mm,
crazy that our society of this day and age throws all of our elders, especially in the West, into old folks' homes? Rather
yeah,
than taking these wisdom keepers and using them to guide the young men and guide the young women to a deeper sense of embodiment. And so to Evan's question, it's it's so important. It's paramount that we have eldership, that we have older men standing in spaces of leadership to show the younger generations the way to go, the better way. And I'm in my 40s now. This is a conversation I'm having with myself a lot. Is like, okay, what does the next 10, 15 years look like? How do I want to be? Is it about being visible? Look at me. Or is it about allowing my wisdom, my lived experience to disintegrate into soil so that those who come after me can root into those nutrients and derive a pathway that is better off because of my lived experience, your lived experience. And I
yeah,
think that's the blessing and beauty of this concept we're talking about, an eldership. Not everybody gets to be an elder, but if you make it there, what an honor. And I think
yeah,
we're in an elder crisis at the moment.
yeah, yeah, where everyone is afraid to become one, and I think a lot of that is the fear of death, and the fear of the acceptance, the fear of the wisdom, the fear of the responsibility that comes with it, because if you're teaching, you better be integrating, you know? And,
Mhm.
so for everybody, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being and sticking with us. This will go into a Substack post and then I'll send it out. And if you are someone or know anyone who's interested in joining Brandon and I on the journey, it starts in October. Applications basically open when I send this out. So you can go to markgroves.com/fourth quarter, like that sports reference, and if you don't get it, no problem. Just know that it's all about like, let's go to the moon with all of it and to the center of the earth. So everybody, appreciate you, Brandon. Thanks so much, brother. Love you.
Big love, everybody.